ethics included in the
Hey, good morning.
in the program as well. So
Fine.
we
Which
are very
project?
grateful that
Oh yeah.
the
How are you?
supervisors are now being trained in data ethics as well. So along with this 2 week program, you will have data ethics, part of that curriculum, and we hope you will take these ideas when you train your students, give them guidance on how to use the data ethics, and what are the kind of frameworks that is available as well. So I just want to pause here. I want to make sure my colleague Kate introduces herself, and then I will go to the presentation. Kate, please introduce yourself.
Hello, everybody. So my name is Catherine Bailey, and my background is in international development and ICT communications. I've worked for several big organizations, including running the publications and communications for the OECD Development Center. And then I started a tech startup that was developing data collection and Internet of Things gadgetry, essentially. And I ran the operations and communications for that. And following that, I was headhunted by Global Open Data for Agriculture and Nutrition. And so I've been working on all matters open data and data ethics since about 2017, where, of course, I met Sushith. So we've sort of developed codes of conduct ourselves in agricultural data. And we're going to be talking to you about that and many other things concerning ethics today. So thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Kate. So without further ado, I think we will start with our our training session now, because we are aware of, we have only 2.5 hours, and we have to fit in a lot of things within that, including a practical session as well. So the session today, we are focusing on the responsible research and innovation and data ethics in research. So the key things that we hope to cover in this session are, give you an overview of what is responsible research and innovation, why is it important, and also give you an overview of why data ethics is important and why it is important to have data ethics in the curriculum in universities. We'll also look into some of the kind of existing data protection legislations available worldwide, giving an overview of the European and other regional legislation as well, and also see what are the gaps in the current legislation. And another aspects we want to make sure you are aware of is the user rights and the need for code of conduct. And we will finish off with a group exercise, which we'll be doing, looking into one of the code of conduct examples, and to make sure you all start thinking about using that code of conduct as an example. You'll be able to get an idea, why and how you can use this code of conducts, and and this group work will help you get more ideas on this aspect as well. So before we start, initially I want to just have a small exercise, and I hope all of you are aware of this United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. There are 17 goals, and I'm sure you have heard about them and you are aware of them in some form. But what I want to do is, and if you look at, in fact, each of every one of these goals, one of the things you will find, which is very important, is data is key part of all this. It doesn't matter which goal you might be working in. For example, zero hunger, you might be working in agriculture kind of thing, or you might be working in education. Whichever SDG you are working in, fundamentally, you will have to. Data is so, you will have to make use of data in one form or another for your research. So this is very fundamental. So what I want to do now is to do a short exercise with all of you. You have the chat function. I can't see the chat function, but Kate should be able to. But what we want to do is, in 5 minutes, just identify which SDG goal does your research contribute to. Just quickly in the chat function, just type in, and I will give it 2 minutes, and I will wait, and Kate is going to read out that later as soon as we finish. So 2 minutes now. So go ahead and just see which SDG goals your research is focusing on. So yeah, go ahead, please. Thanks.
It would be useful to note not just the SDG, but how it relates, how your research relates to the SDG, so that we have.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, perfect. And also, just to mention, but sometimes you might your research might not fit in with one SDG as well. So feel free. For example, if your work is in two SDGs, just put those two. So maybe it's two, or it depends on. So if you are working in some areas, it might have some links with other SDGs. So if you think your research is, or your main research focus has different kind of SDG areas, then just put that as well. That will also be interesting for us to know. Thank you.
So like we just mentioned, if you could note how your research relates to the SDGs, that would be really helpful.
Yes. Yes, that's so very important. So, for example,
but equally, the exercise is more about you having a think about how your research relates to the SDGs. But in order that we can use it as an example, it relates.
Exactly. So, for example, Josephine has said, SDGs 2 and 3. So please, in your in a short sentence, say, how that relates to 2 and 3. Albina said goals 4 and 8. So just some indication. Okay, great. Great. So, for example,
there's a fantastic example here. So, Grace Moringa is an early academician from Kenya, who's working in food science and nutrition. So this line of interest focuses on SDGs 2 and 3, zero hunger and good health.
Great. Yes. This is exactly, so please, think, so it helps you also identify, which kind of theme. So, so for example, in this example, the data that, for example, Grace, the research is doing is more focused on, things on SDG 2, so looking into various aspects of maybe nutrition data, so all these kind of data sets that it's linked, and again how it's linked to health data as well. So those kind of examples are very, very important. So please think like that. Thank you.
Florence is hitting all of the SDGs, or at least most of them. 1, 2, 3, and 7. She's working on use of renewable energy. I should sort of say I kind of assume, but I shouldn't assume. I'm going to say she. In the UK, Florence is usually used as a girl's name, but not always. So the use of renewable energy in processing of agricultural products for extended shelf life. That sounds absolutely fascinating. So it ensures availability of whole products for year-round availability.
Thank you very much. Philbert has given a really good example. SDG 7 and SDG 9. SDG 7 is affordable and clean energy, and 9 is the industry, innovation and infrastructure. Great. So how the wireless networks are improved in terms of energy efficiency and deployment of IoTs in security, agriculture and manufacturing industries. Oh, fantastic. So maybe there's some links with even SDG 2, so it's okay, great to know that research. Thank you. Anything else, Kate, to read out?
I think, to be honest, there are lots of fantastic examples, so we could read all of them out. But at the same time, it's really great that everybody's now thinking about how it relates directly to those SDGs.
Yep. So what we really hope is you start understanding, whichever SDG you are working in. For example, like if it is SDG 2 and 5 that Anne has just put in on micronutrients in traditional foods, dietary diversity and gender dynamics of food production and consumption, you will find that without getting access to data, you are not able to not only understand what is the current situation, for your research, but also even if you want to monitor the current, current situation, and if you want to monitor progress, what has been happening, just look at SDG 2, zero hunger. If you want to know, how many, within one country or within one area, how many children are suffering from malnutrition, you need access to the data. And if you want to look at, how things are changing, for example, what is the statistics in 1990, what is the statistics in 1994, now, 95, what is in 2000, and what is the reason. So you are able to, without getting access to this data, your research is very difficult to do research on any of these areas. So as we see now by colleagues sharing, whichever SDGs they are working in, data is very, very fundamental for us to do any research. So this is the whole point of this exercise, is to help you, see the value of open data, and how open data can help us. And even for your students, when you are guiding them, maybe this small exercise is a really important starting point for them to also think about, what is, which kind of SDG they are contributing, what is their contributions to whichever research area they are working in, plus, how they can, what kind of data sets they need to be aware of, what tools they need to be using for their research. So this is fundamentally for that aim. So I'm going to move on. We'll come back to this later. In fact, even in our exercise that we are going to do later, you'll find some of these ideas useful. So some of them, I want to also stress that, as we saw, it is not one SDG that mostly, when you are doing research, you'll find, your research will be linking many different SDGs. And, from, if you're working in climate change to, looking at the environmental degradation, rising social inequality, all these, are all interlinked. It is not, if you look at even, zero hunger SDG 2, if you're just working in that area alone, again, there are a lot of these other SDGs which will be connected. So, you need to think about the links of your research with other kind of aspects, and that will help you also understand, what are the social implications, what are the economic implications of your research. And this is something that is very, very fundamental when you are thinking about responsible research and innovation, which is fundamentally, how you are able to properly align, the research and innovation have to properly align to the needs, the values, and the expectation of society. And this is, and the exercise that we did before, trying to understand, how, which part of the society is in your particular research is impacting, what are the environmental impacts of it, what are the social impacts of it, what are the economic impacts of it. All these, we need to make sure that, we start thinking even before the research, you start doing the research, and that is all part of that RRI frameworks. And there are many examples, and I want to show this one framework, which is really very useful and is widely used around the world, and it is from the UKRI, the area framework. I don't know how many of you have heard about it, but if you are not, I will recommend you to learn more about this. It's a really useful tool or practice which we can use to help, especially before you start your research. And area stands for A stands for the anticipate, R for reflect, engage, and act. And why is it important? So, for example, even before when your students, if you're starting a new PhD project, or you're starting a new research, it's very important you start looking into and describing and analyzing the impacts, intended or otherwise, that might arise from your research. It's about exploring possible impacts, impacts from the economic perspective, from the social perspective, from the environmental perspective, and implications that may otherwise remain uncovered if you don't think about it. So this is the whole purpose of trying to anticipate, and also then reflecting critically on on the purposes, the motivation, and the potential implications of the research. And so you have to ask, for example, if that research is funded by a particular funder, what are the you need to think about what are the motivations of the funder. All these kind of questions need to be asked in this reflection phase. together, because again, when you're doing research, there are a lot of uncertainties. You might not know exactly, what that, so you need to start thinking about, what are the things that are uncertain, which are the areas of ignorance, what are the assumptions that you are making, how do you frame the research questions? Very important. And there will be a lot of social dilemma, different dilemmas that you might be faced, and what are all these kind of aspects. And many of the questions, sometimes, we might not even know the answers. And that is why the third step is so important. It's engaging, it's in that discussions, opening up different visions, asking questions, and discussing it, dialogue, engagement, asking your peers. So for example, you are all working in different universities, and in fact, this ICANN network is also a really good, network of university. You have a peer network, so if you don't know the answers, you can always reach out to other colleagues, ask them, for advice. So that is also very important. So you engage. If you don't know the answers, you engage, and hopefully, through that peer learning, we learn more. And in fact, that is why we are doing this group exercise later in the session, is to help you all start looking at things and sharing ideas and coming up with answers by that joint working and thinking ideas together. And finally, we act. From all the things that you learned, use the process to influence the direction and trajectory of the research that you're going to do yourself. So this is the kind of the framework and process for RRI. So now if we come back to the question that the exercise that we did before, using the UN SDG aims, so you have to, whenever you start a new PhD research as well, you need to start looking at, where is your research contributing to, and then also look at some of these frameworks, the framework that we showed, like the area of framework, and then you have much better idea, and then you start iterating these techniques to help you get more information and more better prepared for that research that you're doing. And it's you learn as we go. So you keep thinking, and you keep asking questions, and you share ideas as we go along. So that is the basic framework. So as we mentioned, data is very fundamental to any research that you're doing. Especially nowadays, we can't do any research without data. And I want to give you one example, and I'm sure colleagues who are working in different areas, they are all using one form or another different open data sets that are available, because that has been a very, if you look at even the last 10 years, this is a really kind of big boon for research, because previously, even to get access to data was very, very expensive, highly expensive, and very difficult, especially for colleagues from developing countries. So I want to give one example, because as I mentioned, my background is in geospatial science, and I don't know, because I saw earlier when we did the exercise, a lot of colleagues are working in, for example, zero hunger aim, in agriculture, different areas. So they are, for example, if you are even working in agriculture, Earth observation data is one of the major source of data, to help understand, what are the crop distributions, all these things. But previously, this data, the Earth observation data, was not freely available. In fact, if you look at the timeline, I don't know how many of you are using Earth observation data, but previous to 2008 time, you had to purchase Earth observation data, very expensive, and so not many universities, especially in global South, had access to many of these data sets. And you can see, when Landsat is one of the very widely used Earth observation freely available data sets now, and you can see from 2008 when USGS made Landsat available, you can see the huge increase in the number of usage of the collection of the Landsat, and it just shows, once this data is made freely available, it has a huge societal benefits. So researchers and policymakers are able to get access to the data, and they are able to use this data for their different purposes. And USGS, the Landsat, is a very excellent example of how, by releasing the data free and openly, you are able to make sure, get that benefits to the users. And it not only economic benefits, it also created a lot of new SMEs, it benefited industries, everybody. So this is a really good example. And In terms of research wise, you can see the blue line is the cost, the price per scene, before, you can see like, you can see from 2008, the cost became, around 2010, they made it fully free. So it is zero cost. But before, you can see, the cost, and as soon as the cost became zero, you can see the number of citations, the number of researchers who were able to make use of the data and then use that data for the research, increased huge, and that just shows the real impact of open data. So the citations are the orange line, and the cost per scene is the blue line. And this graph shows that citation increased greatly after the open data policy in December 2008. And this is exactly what has happened once we had more open data available. It was a really great boon for researchers everywhere to make use of the data. And it benefited all sectors, from education, science, agriculture, government, and this just shows, it's not one field that benefited from having the open data. It benefited all sectors and all disciplines as well. And this is just one small example, from one small sub example, because even in geospatial, there is a lot of open data, and in the Earth observation again there are a lot of, but just you can see the impact that open data makes, and has the potential to make to everyone, and especially for making sure we have a level playing field for everybody around the world. But also, we have to now also think about, what are the kind of, implications. If, for example, if all this open data is made available, but is only available through some big data platforms only, which is now more and more the scenario. Even if you have if the government decides to release the open data, like the example from Landsat, because the main rationale is, it is already taxpayer funded. The resources are taxpayer. All the Landsat data is already made. It's made thanks to the taxpayer already funding it. But if the openly released data is now, we have to depend on a few big data platforms to get access to it, and they are going to charge cost for the users. How does it, will everybody get access to the data, or will again, then people have to pay, so that will mean a lot of colleagues in the global south won't have access. So there are a lot of questions. Right now it might be free, but how do we make sure that these free and open there are free and open platforms in the long term as well, so that researchers and students from the developing world, and they are all able to get access to these data sets. So there are a lot of questions, and also there are more, especially in the digital platform economy, there are wider questions. If you look at the social media platforms and everything, how do you how it raises a lot of ethical questions. How to protect human rights in the big data platforms, and all those questions, who owns the data. So there are a lot of questions as well, ethical questions as well, which are also happening because of the kind of the big data aspects as well. So I want to give you one example. 2 years back, less than 2 years back, me and Kate, we were looking into this issue of data feudalism from an agriculture data perspective, and there is an organization called the GPSST, the Global Platform for Global Sustainable Development Goal, and they requested us to start looking into this topic, and we wrote a short article on digital feudalism and its impact on agriculture, and one of the things that we realized was this feudalism, which is now coming in the digital form, and how is this going to impact, for example, the smallholder farmers? So these are some big issues. Because if you think about it, smallholder farmers are the majority of livelihood for the most economically poor communities, mostly in the developing world, and especially now with lot of digital agriculture happening. How do we protect the data rights of the smallholder farmers? Many of these smallholder farmers might not even be literate. They might even don't even know the data rights. So if these big data platforms come, collect all the data, and they own the data, what are the implications? How do you make sure there is some code of conduct developed? And in fact, we were working and we developed a code of conduct for agriculture data. How do we make sure like the farmer cooperatives are aware of all this? How do you make sure we develop the skills? So all these kind of things, data ethics is very important. So because many of the end users, they might not have the knowledge or the skills. So it's very important that universities have a big role to play. If you are teaching agriculture courses, you need to make sure there is some of these frameworks like the code of conduct, data ethics, why it's all important, are taught in the curriculum. So then it makes sure the students who are working in these areas, they are better. They have better knowledge of what are the code of conducts that are available, how to make sure they do the research ethically. So this is one example from agriculture, and you're very welcome to look at the full paper that we wrote as well, which has more details. And one of the things that we mentioned is the importance of education in this, to ensure we start making sure there is data ethics education happening at the university level. And I also want to highlight another area which is very important, which is also one of the concerns, is about the issue of data colonialism, which is basically combines the predatory extractive data practices which happened with the computational aspects that is happening. And good example is many of these vendors, they might give currently some free licenses or whatever for you to use the data. And there are many GIS vendors and all, they give some free licenses, but they might use that to collect your data and use that data, and it's another form of data colonialism that is happening. So these are very, very big ethical questions of how do you make sure you are how do you make sure when you start your research, you are aware of all these kind of questions, which platforms are you using using for your research, and if it is, for example, collecting data from indigenous communities, for example, many of the research, some of your research might be working with indigenous populations, and if you are using some of these big data platforms, collecting the data and putting the data in these platforms, then there are a lot of ethical questions. So all these kind of questions you need to be aware of before you start your research as well. So coming back, we will look into how can we create, with all these kind of issues, how do we create a more equitable data ecosystems? That's what there are a lot of work going on around the world in this topic. There are a lot of frameworks, there are a lot of code of conducts that have been developed. What we will do is we will share some examples. We won't be able to go into details because there are so many, and there are a lot of different disciplines. They have different code of conducts as well. So, but what we hope to do is we will give you a flavor of some of the code of conducts that is already there, and then you can all this information we share all the slides with you as well. So you can in your own time you can start looking into what else is available, and you can even go through some of these code of conducts in details as well, and then see how you can use some of this in your research. So I want to come back again, highlight data is very key for UNSDG aims, and for whichever research topic you are working in, data plays a very, very important role. And to make sure, the thing is, education and capacity development is very key, and that's why data ethics training. So when you are using data, it's very important you start. That's why we have been championing for data ethics to be part of the curriculum. We have all these courses now starting in data science in universities around the world. So it's so important to have data ethics as part of the curriculum as well. And today's, like the graduate supervisor training course, what we hope to do is to so now as supervisors of PhDs, you are aware of these big questions. You become the champions to start including data ethics as part of your training. And in your PhD research, you can make sure your students are also aware of these topics as well. So, in a very basic, in a very short background, data ethics is the branch of ethics that studies and evaluates moral problems related to data. And data means data collection, data use, all this. So it's the how you use the data, you collect the data, how you reuse the data, and algorithms. Especially now with machine learning and AI and all those aspects. All those are also part of the algorithms. And corresponding practices, things like code of conduct, in order to formulate a formulate and support morally good solutions in a right context or right values. So that is, and there's a really excellent paper, the link I have put, which actually gives more information on the wider field of data ethics, which I will recommend you to look into, read that paper when you have time. So what I want to do now is to give a very basic introduction of some of the research frameworks which are already there. Which some of which you might already be aware of, like the FAIR principles, but some of you might not have heard about, like the CARE or TRUST. But I thought I will at least give some background now, so you can get some basic ideas, and then there is a lot of information already available. In fact, I have put all the links where you want to find the information in my slides, and so you will be able to get more information. But the purpose today is to just give because of the time constraint. Ideally, if it's a 2-day program, we will go into details of all of this. But because we are compressing 2 days into 2 hours, what I will have to give just a broad overview, and then hopefully, with all the information I'm going to provide, you will be able to go and look into each of this in detail, because it's a lot of information is available, so you can look through them in detail and help understand more what each of these are. So the most widely heard about is FAIR, the findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, which is one of the guiding principles for scientific data management and stewardship. And this is so important. FAIR made sure all the benefits that we are seeing in open data movement is actually thanks to FAIR principles. Because previously, even like 20 years back, look at the whole interoperability. Okay, very difficult to find. Many of the data sets were in proprietary format, so it was so difficult to get data. And how do you make data from one format to other? There are so many difficulties, but many things have changed, and thanks to all this, even the whole the interoperability developments. In fact, even in my discipline of geospatial science, when I look back, it was from around 1995 time. There was actually the whole developments happened through an organization called the Open Geospatial Consortium. Some of you might be aware of the OGC, which started working in the kind of interoperability in the geospatial science and the data for geospatial. So, and similarly in many different disciplines, there were big push to make sure the data the metadata is interoperable and all these aspects. So, and the FAIR principles are a really good example, and this has a huge benefit for scientific research, because if you look at the data, whichever SDG aims you are working in, you have to have you have to link data from different sources, different disciplines. So all these fundamental principles are very important. And findable means data and the supplementary materials have sufficiently rich metadata and unique and persistent identifier. That's what means by findable. And accessible means the metadata and data are understandable to humans and machines. Data is deposited in a trusted repository, so that makes sure you are able to find, access the data and make use of it. And interoperable means that metadata use a formal, accessible, shared, and broadly applicable language for knowledge representation. And finally, reusable means the data and collections have a clear usage licenses and provide accurate information on provenance. And this is so important because we need to know where the data came from as well. So to know the quality and all those, the provenance of data is also very important. So that's that will help you understand the uncertainties, all those aspects. So this is the whole the bigger kind of aim of the fair data aspects. So another, as I mentioned, there are many different aspects. So there is another very widely used, even though it's recently, but it is now getting a lot of interest, is the CARE principles for indigenous data governance. And CARE, this was actually developed by the RDA's International, the Research Data Alliance International Indigenous Data Sovereignty Interest Group. In fact, I would also recommend, if you are working in this indigenous data, or working with indigenous communities, you join this RDA Indigenous Data Sovereignty Working Group, because there's a lot of knowledge and ideas shared in this group as well. And it is the global GIDA, the Global Indigenous Data Alliance, that developed this CARE principles for indigenous data governance. And this stands for, the C stands for the collective benefit, A for the authority to control, R responsibility and ethics. So this is another framework which is very, very important. And the collective benefit means the data ecosystem shall be designed and function in ways that enable indigenous people to derive benefits from the data. And there are again different kind of themes within that, which will give you more ideas on that. And responsibility means those working with indigenous data have a responsibility to share how those data are used to support indigenous people's self-determination and collective benefit. So, if, for example, if any of you are, in different fields, if you are working in agriculture or any, even climate change, if you are working with indigenous communities and collecting indigenous data, it is so important that you are aware of this indigenous care principles. A stands for authority to control, and it is about indigenous people's rights and interest in indigenous data must be recognized, and their authority to control such data respected. So it's recognizing rights and interests, data for governance, and governance of data. And finally, ethics means it stands for the indigenous people's rights and well-being should be the primary concern at all stages of the data life cycle and access and across the data ecosystem. And it needs to make sure for minimizing harm and maximizing benefit for justice and for future use. So this is if you go to the link I put before, you'll be able to find more details of the CARE principles and how to learn more about this. And finally, this is more from a data repository kind of angle, the trust principles. And again, it's a community effort from the RDA. And people those colleagues who don't know about the RDA, it stands for the Research Data Alliance. It's a free and open research community that anybody can join. And I will recommend that if you have not yet joined, do join, because it gives you a really, there are a lot of mailing lists depending on your research area. For example, for geospatial, there is an interest group for geospatial IG. For agriculture, there is a agriculture group, a community. So if you are part of it, it is a really good way for you to learn more about what's currently happening. And it's also important for the PhD students, your PhD students, because then they will be able to learn more of the current state of developments that is happening. Plus, if they have any queries, you can always ask the community. There are a lot of mailing lists where you can share your queries, and the community members. Some of the questions, we might not know the answers, but as I mentioned in the before, it's peer learning. Nobody knows the answers, but through all of us sharing ideas, we will be able to find solutions. So, RDA community has been really active in trying to look into some of these questions, and the trust principles for digital repositories has been developed through an RDA community effort. And the trust stands for transparency, which means to be transparent about the specific repository services and data holdings that are verifiable by publicly accessible evidence. R stands for responsibility, means to be responsible for ensuring the authenticity and integrity of data holdings and for the reliability and persistence of the service. This is so important because you need to make sure that data sets are available not just during the project life cycle, but it's available even after the project funding ends. So these are so many questions. So even if you deposit in a repository, how do you ensure that that's available in the long term? So that's where responsibility and the persistence of service is very important. User focus, to ensure that the data management norms and expectations of target user communities are met. Sustainability is to sustain services and preserve data holdings for the long term. And technology is to provide infrastructure and capabilities to support secure, persistent, and reliable services. And again, there's a journal article that is on trust principles, which the link of this which is available, which I will recommend you to read through, especially if you're working in kind of the data repository side, to get more understanding and how you can use, get more ideas for your research as well. And now I want to quickly move to show some developments that are happening. And one of the examples I want to share with you is this data values movement, which is being done through this GPSST. They had a data values project, and this again comes from looking into why there is a need to create a fairer data future for everybody. And the fundamental idea is data needs to serve everyone. And getting it right is not just a technical, because people think that all these are just the technical kind of questions, but actually it is not. It's more a kind of social political endeavor, as it is, because you need to make sure there is the right funding mechanisms from the start to ensure this happens. So we need to build data systems that help and empower people instead of harming and excluding them. This demands change in the ways we design, collect, fund, manage, and use data. And this data values movement was created to call for urgent action to create a fair data future where governments, organizations, and people come together to create this change. And they even created a data values manifesto, which the link of this I have put here. It is part of this data for SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals aspect projects that they have been doing, and it is a really good resource. And I'm just going to condense what they did in a few minutes, but ideally, I would have, we do a hands-on exercise on this, because it's so important to get your inputs, but because of time limitations, I can't do that. But what I hope to do is at least give you a flavor of what is in this data values key aspects, and then you are able to learn more. Fundamentally, they have these five steps to create a fair data future. The first one is to support people to shape how they are represented in data. Second is to invest in public participation for accountability. Third is democratizing data skills for greater equality. And as you are aware, many of the, even if you have open data available, how many people have the skills to make use of the data? It's quite, we have a big data literacy problem as well. So, how do you make sure we are able to scale up the data skills capacity across the world? And fourth is creating cultures of transparency, data sharing, and use. And finally, the fifth one is funding open and responsive data systems so that all people share the benefits of data. So by supporting people to shape how they are representing data, what they mean is people must have a say in the data design and collection. It's not just going and collecting data, but before you even start your project, you need to start thinking about, if you are collecting data, how do you make sure the people have a say in the data design and collection that affects their life? Because everyone deserves to have their needs, priorities, and experiences as they define them captured in the data. So that's so important to make sure you are aware of, before you start your research project itself, you are aware of it. And the second, by what is meant by investing in public participation for accountability is that people must be included in the decisions related to data use and reuse. So this is very important to hold leaders accountable, protect people from harm, and improving lives. The third one, as I mentioned, how do we make sure more people are skilled in data? This is very important if you want to make sure everyone everywhere can gain confidence to engage with and use data. Widespread data confidence is a building block for fair data future. And in fact, universities, I believe, play a big role in this, because how do we, when we want to develop data skills, we have to make sure universities are key in education. So, running training programs, making sure not only at the graduate level, undergraduate level as well, and even, how can universities help in creating, to ensure that there is data skills capability available for the wider society as well. So I believe universities have a key role in this third aspects of democratizing data skills for greater equality. And the fourth is creating cultures of transparency, data sharing and use. By this, what is meant that is, all leaders must invest in strengthening cultures of data use and reuse. Repeated positive experience of regulating, sharing, and using data for public good will build trust. Because fundamentally, it is about, if you don't build trust in the whole data ecosystem, then you will not get in a fair data ecosystem. So, how do you build trust is so important. And the final one is funding. How do you fund to make sure the funders fund open and responsive data systems so that all people share and benefit of data. And this is the responsibility of whoever the funder. It may be a government or a donor or a research funder. They all need to make sure they dedicate more funding to data systems that support action and promote participation and inclusion from start to finish. So it is a so that's why initially I mentioned that creating a fair data future is not just about technical solutions alone. It is to ensure that it is a social issue as well. And everybody has a responsibility to make that happen. And this, I want to give you, why this is important, because people think that if you have equality, it solves the problem. But quite frankly, it is just having equality alone is not going to solve. It is how do you create equity? The very fact is that just creating like a equal framework doesn't mean everybody will benefit, especially if somebody is from economically poor backgrounds. All these kind of factors. Those communities need more support. So that is why equity is very fundamental, and this is a really great way to help convey that the reason. And fundamentally, the reality is that we are living in a very unequal society. There is we have very unequal economic systems, and where there are some people we have few very big billionaires, and majority of the world population even living less than $2 a day. Millions of people without without even the very basic necessities of life. So when we are working in the UN SDG aims, we are trying to make sure everybody improves. So the reality is, right now there is a big kind of inequality. So how do you make sure everyone gets the support that needs? That is about equity. So we have to make sure everybody. But more importantly, justice is also very important. How do you make sure systemic barriers? How do you make sure the economically poor are also able to enjoy the benefits? Of all this. If we are looking at any SDG goals, we need to make sure everybody benefits. And how do you make sure everybody is included? Their voices are heard. So all these kind of are part of part of the things that we need to be aware of. And there is a need for user rights and need for code of conduct. In fact, the next stage of our presentation is going to look into these kind of the importance of having code of conduct, and we will be looking into one. There are so many other examples. There is examples from the European Data Protection Board. There is a lot of other examples from globally, and there are also community-based code of conduct, like Locus Charter, which we are going to look into more detail for our example. But the same, there are, depending on your discipline, there might be other examples as well. So, just want to give you a flavor. And even for different communities, they also have different code of conduct. For example, from the geospatial field, there is a GIS code of conduct, which was developed by an organization called URISA, which is based in the US task force, the URISA Ethics Task Force. And this is a very widely used code of conduct. It's a professional code of conduct, so it's for the professionals. And the main ethics of the primary categories of this is, as a professional in your field, what are your obligations to society? What are your obligations to your employers, funders? what are your obligations to colleagues and the professions? What are your obligations to individuals in society? So we are all whichever profession we are working. I just give you one example from one field, but you will have different kind of examples in other fields as well. So this just shows you all professions, they have their own code of conduct as well, which is important that when you are doing research in different fields, you make your students aware of which are the professional code of conduct that they need to be aware of. That's also very key. And I'm going to hand over now to my colleague Kate, who is going to talk about the second part of this topic, which is going to look into more on the legislation, policies, and code of conduct. Thank you very much. Over to you, Kate.
Thank you, Sashith. I'm just going to share my screen. If everyone could just bear with me 1 second. Okay, can you see that, Sashith? Yeah.
Yes.
Everyone can see the presentation. So we'll be looking now a lot more in depth into the codes of conduct that Sashith's already touched upon, and how they help to inform legislation and policy, and the importance really of codes of conduct in developing that legislation and policy. So I'm not sure if anybody has heard of this term datafication. It's a relatively new term that is being bandied around quite a lot in data ethics circles at the moment. And datafication is essentially the quantification of human life through digital information. Datafication generates similar risks across every domain. And some examples of those risks are, for example, bias. So increasing risks for those who are perhaps excluded, underrepresented, or even overrepresented in data sets. And it can also make those that lack data literacy skills quite vulnerable, excluding them from the benefits of being able to use that data or understand data-driven technologies. And it also has the potential to impact diversity among data practitioners as well. Another if I could ask really quickly that all the participants mute, thank you very much. That would be really helpful. So another risk that comes with datafication is privacy. So intrusion into private and collective lives, and with it the potential for exercising influence on people. And this is something that we saw in the UK fairly recently with the Cambridge Analytica scandal. Datafication can create imbalances in market power, so exacerbating things like data colonialism as more resource companies and countries can effectively exercise power over less resourced companies or countries. And an increase in complexity is another risk. So as more and more advanced data services create challenges for transparency and accountability, and this will only increase as more technologies converge. Okay, moving on. Why does this matter to you? And this is the big question. So data is now, as we've established, firmly embedded in everything from services to decision-making processes, and it's only going to get more complex as data technology evolves. So we've already seen monitoring of infrastructure, computer vision analysis of CCTV, for example, which is sort of getting more and more detailed and more complex. Monitoring and management of traffic and air pollution. So as you can see, some of these examples, they do bring really great benefits for society, but there's also the potential for those risks to slip in there. So things like social media monitoring to understand citizens' needs, where kind of on the other hand, it can also be used as a tool to predict behavior, for example, or to influence choices within the population. There's more of a demand for data integration and dashboards, which in itself is wonderful because it can help in decision making, but also, there's a lot of issues that come along with it. How do we store that data? What do we do with it? What is that data ultimately used for? And of course, more and more applications of IoT technologies. So our role as data practitioners and researchers is changing due to the use of technology and the way that the use of technology is changing and expanding. And we have a responsibility to ensure that we demonstrate that we can be trusted with people's data in order to maximize the potential for good and avoid these societal harms. So currently 137 out of 194 countries worldwide have put in place legislation to secure the protection of data and privacy. And according to the UN latest figures, 71% of countries have data protection legislation already in place. 9% of countries are currently in the process of drafting legislation, and 15% of countries currently have no legislation. Data and the storage, use and access to data sources has been a concern of data practitioners for decades. However, due to the exponential rise in IoT and sensor technologies in all sectors, including the boom in smart home devices, as well as our increased online presence, the importance of privacy and data protection is now becoming increasingly recognised among the population. So consumers and individuals are becoming increasingly concerned about the collection, use and sharing of personal information to third parties, including around understanding the notice and consent process, which is inherent in most laws. With the increased awareness among the population comes increased pressure, of course, on governments and policymakers to translate these concerns on into policy and law. So 71% of countries worldwide we've established have already adopted data protection legislation, but the picture isn't quite as equal when we look at this on a regional basis. Africa and Asia show different levels of data legislation creation, with only 61% of African countries and 57% of Asian countries having adopted such legislations. In fact, the share of data protection legislation in the least developed countries is only 48%. And of course, that leaves socioeconomically vulnerable regions even more vulnerable to potential exploitation and to harms such as data colonialism, as Sashith touched on earlier. So the importance of GDPR. I'm going to look a little more closely at the European Legal Data Protection Framework, so GDPR, since this is arguably still the gold standard for data protection legislation worldwide, and it's influenced the development of privacy legislation across the world. Now, GDPR focuses on a central element of data ethics, namely protecting people's privacy. It also touches upon other elements of data ethics, such as accountability and transparency. However, there are some ethical issues, many ethical issues, in fact, as well as business competition laws that are not covered or difficult to legislate for in this new and constantly changing environment. This diagram shows a rudimentary overview of how policy in general is made before eventually being codified in law. And I don't know how many of you are knowledgeable about policy development, but this just gives us a quick overview so that we're all up to speed.
Excuse me.
Policy development is an iterative process that begins with identifying and defining an issue that needs solving.
Catherine, Catherine, somebody has a question.
Yes, this is Vincent. May I know what GDPR something stands for?
Global Data Protection Regulation, I believe.
Thanks.
Or General Data Protection Regulation, sorry. As it is quite a generalized set of rules and regulations. Where were we? So policy development's an iterative process. So it begins with identifying and defining an issue that needs solving, then moves on to analysis, implementation, evaluation, and then finally back to the start again with a new iteration of problem definition. And although policy agendas and laws are proposed and decided upon by national governments generally, then international organizations, NGOs, lobby groups and other bodies work behind the scenes to inform or seek to influence agendas and decisions. The concept for a legally binding data protection framework originally came from a list of principles put forward in 1980 in the OECD General Council White Paper on recommendations of the Council concerning guidelines governing the protection, privacy and transborder flows of personal data. That's a bit of a mouthful, but effectively what we can say is it's sort of the OECD's efforts to look into data, so an NGO's efforts to look into data that have then formed the basis of these data laws. So you could argue really that the guidelines were essentially a rudimentary version of a voluntary code of conduct. Here in the UK, it replaced the 1995 UK Data Protection Directive as a more comprehensive and collaborative construct, and it's been used since as a basis for other legislative frameworks. The European Council recognised the need for personal data protection in 1981, though it didn't enter into European law until 2016 with the advent of the Data Protection Directive. As this image hopefully demonstrates, there are constant changes and developments to data protection legislation as the data sector continues to evolve. So Africa's currently continuing to strengthen its data protection legal and regulatory frameworks, and to date 36 out of 54 African countries have data protection laws and or regulations. 18 countries have signed the African Union Convention on Cybersecurity and Personal Data Protection. So that's more commonly known as the Malabo Convention. The Malabo Convention was adopted on the 27th of June 2014, and 14 countries have ratified it so far, with the latest being the Côte d'Ivoire in March 2023. So this is still an ongoing process. And actually, if you look on the African Union website, then you can get updates as countries sign up to and ratify the convention. Interestingly, or perhaps obviously, given the current global economic climate, the most recent developments in global data law focus more on promoting growth than on the ethics of data protection. However, the openness of data and ability to reuse it is also important, as Sashith touched upon earlier, as data helps us, of course, to make forecasts and decisions. So the European Data Governance Act, which will be applicable from the 24th of September 2023, so it's still going through the Parliament, takes this into consideration and is looking at creating a framework for increased data availability and reuse within the European Union. This Data Governance Act is a key pillar of the European strategy for data, which seeks to promote reuse of data with a view to encouraging growth. The volume of data generated has grown exponentially in recent years, and it's expected to grow further over coming years. Data has become central to our lives and has become a resource for economic and societal efficiency, growth and innovation. Yet there's been relatively limited data sharing despite its various benefits. So 3 primary issues have been identified by the European Commission during this process as hindering effective data sharing. So firstly, the lack of appropriate data sharing structures. Secondly, technological obstacles. Of course, there isn't necessarily regulatory alignment in place. The different technologies don't necessarily work together, for example. So technology can also be an obstacle. And finally, low trust from data users, and therefore, not as much data collection as there could be in order to contribute towards the common good. Therefore, data trust is a really, really big issue. So looking at our legal responsibilities under GDPR as either a researcher, data analyst or data professional, so personal data, when it's collected, stored or reused, must be processed lawfully, fairly, and in a transparent manner. It must be collected only for specified, explicit, and legitimate purposes, and not be further processed in any manner incompatible with those. It must be adequate and relevant and limited to what is necessary in relation to the purposes for what it is processed. It must be accurate and, where necessary, kept up to date. It must not be identifiable data for longer than necessary for the purposes concerned, and it must be processed securely. So, you know, we can see, as we mentioned earlier, that one of the biggest concerns is privacy within that, in order to build that trust. So even with the rapidly developing legislations, there are many ethical questions that continue to arise, including whether enough is being done to protect tech users, for example. So current legislation calls for an opt-in approach to user consent, and aside issues of data literacy and understanding mentioned earlier, deciding not to provide data or only to provide certain data to platforms can result in reduced or suboptimal service or exclusion. So it could be argued that users are actually being coerced into handing over personal data in exchange for time-saving features or social exclusion. So there's obviously ethical questions sort of tied up in that as well that really need to be explored in more detail. As we've seen, data policy and the creation of data regulatory law, much like data collection technologies, is a constantly evolving process. And although there are mechanisms in place to enforce GDPR and other data legislation, and most regulation provides principles that require strict adherence, there are nevertheless gaps. Current data laws are not completely prescriptive, although, as we've discussed, the many and varied issues of this new and constantly evolving environment make legislating difficult. Additionally, current rules require self-reporting, and companies and organizations that collect, use, or store data are required to keep their own internal policies and risk assessments, both to make sense of how the rules apply to them, but also similarly to the codes of conduct that we're going to look at in a minute, to fill relevant gaps in ethical treatment of data not already covered in the legislation. Unlike national policies and legislation, data has no boundaries, which adds to the challenge of setting effective and adequate rules. The rules applicable in Europe mean nothing, for example, to companies in China. So codes of conduct have developed to provide sector-specific guidelines to help with compliance and with data legislation, but also to fill the gaps in current legislation and help educate and build awareness around ethical practices. These codes of conduct require self-regulation, are voluntary and principle-based, and have attitude and behavioural changes as key goals, as well as increasing transparency overall. Codes of conduct are voluntary accountability tools, essentially, helping sectors identify and resolve key data protection and ethical challenges, and allowing them to demonstrate accountability and build trust. Tools such as codes of conduct and accreditations help to raise awareness around the collection, use, and sharing of data. They help to improve transparency, clarity, and honesty in the way data is collected, used, and shared. They help to encourage the fair and equitable collection, use, and sharing of data in a way that benefits individual users, small businesses and organizations, and of course, potentially vulnerable communities. They help to build trust in and confidence in the way that data is collected, used, and shared, so that where appropriate, data can be utilised in ways that bring benefit to communities. And a more transparent approach to data collection and use could help us to alleviate mistrust around the ways that data is collected and shared. It can help us to minimise the risks of not including parts of a population or individuals in data collection, which in turn just leads to more accurate and more usable data. So we'll now look in a little more detail at a data ethics code of conduct. Now, the Locus Charter is one of many, but at the same time, it is a good place to start, as it's a generalised code of conduct around the use and reuse of geospatial data. So skilled practitioners started approaching ethical geo around 2016, 2018, around that sort of time frame, stating that there wasn't enough guidance or an agreed set of principles, and they'd like to see Ethical Geo do more around that. So the Benchmark Initiative and Ethical Geo started putting together what's now known as the Locus Charter, and they came to us for advice on creating and developing a code of conduct, as we just launched the Agricultural Data Codes of Conduct Toolkit, which was jointly developed by Global Open Data for Agriculture and Nutrition that Sushith and I represented at the time, and by the UNFAO and the CTA and a few other organisations inputted into that. The Locus Charter proposes that wider shared understanding of risks and solutions relating to uses of location data can improve standards of practice and can help to protect individuals and the public interest. And the creators of the Charter hope it can improve understanding of risk so that those can be managed and the many benefits of geospatial technologies can be realised for individuals and for societies. So the Locus Charter team set about developing a set of principles using a mixture of brainstorming sessions and workshops that we sort of advised them on. And they invited a broad spectrum of representatives to help them to understand the priorities and data users and the data providers. And the end result was a list of 10 principles or guidelines that everyone agreed were important. So the list that we're going to look at in a minute, it might be numbered, but at the same time, it's presented in no particular order as what the team discovered, which is something that we had already discovered in our work, that priorities were different depending on your perspective. So we're going to simulate a workshop similar to the ones that help to develop these codes of conduct and the Locus Charter among them, to help you understand the complexities and challenges in meeting often conflicting needs of different stakeholders. So I'm just going to go quickly through the Locus Charter principles right now, and then we're going to split into teams representing different stakeholder groups to complete the activity. The activity consists of prioritising those principles depending on what stakeholder group you're part of, but I'll explain a little bit more in a minute. We'll just look quickly at those principles. So the Locus Charter, their vision is a world where location data is utilised for the betterment of the world and all who live in it. And the Locus Charter, who they are, an international collaboration of governments, organisations and individual practitioners seeking to ensure the ethical and responsible use of location data throughout the world. As we said, there are 10 principles that they came up with. And all of them have equal importance because all of them have more or less importance to others within the group. So the founding principles, first of all, principle 1. I'll run through them really, really quickly, and then you'll have a chance to sort of read them and number them together in your groups. First of all, realising opportunities. So location data offers many social and economic benefits, and these opportunities should be realised responsibly. Principle 2, understanding impacts. For example, users of location data have a responsibility to understand the potential effects of their uses of data, including knowing who, individuals or groups, and what could be affected and how. That understanding should be used to make informed and proportionate decisions and to minimise negative impacts. Principle 3, do no harm. Physical proximity amplifies the potential harms that can befall people, flora and fauna. Data users should ensure that the individual or collective location data pertaining to all species should not be used to discriminate, exploit or harm. Rights established in the physical world must be protected in digital context and interactions. So I think we can all agree that that's important, but where it falls in the level of importance to different stakeholders, that's what's in question. Principle 4, protect the vulnerable. Vulnerable people and places can be disproportionately harmed by the misuses of location data and may lack the capacity to protect themselves. In these contexts, data users should take additional care, act proportionately and positively around causing harm. Principle 5, address bias. Bias in the collection, use and combination of location data sets can either remove affected groups from mapping that conveys rights or services or amplifying negative impacts of inclusion in a data set. Therefore, care should be taken to understand bias in the data sets and avoid discriminatory outcomes. Principle 6, minimize intrusion. Given the intimate and personal nature of location data, users should avoid unnecessary and intrusive examination of people's lives and the places they live in that would undermine human dignity. Principle 7, minimize data. So most businesses and mission applications do not require the most invasive scale of location tracking available in order to provide the intended level of service. Users should comply with practices that adhere to the data minimization principle, using only the necessary personal data that is adequate, relevant, and limited to the objective, including abstracting location data to the least invasive scale feasible for the application. Principle 8, protect privacy. Tracking the movement of individuals through space and time gives insights to the most intimate aspects of their lives. In the rare cases where aggregated and anonymized location data will not meet the specific business or mission need, location data that identifies individuals should be respected, protected, and used with informed consent where possible and proportionate. Whew, we're almost there. Principle 9. So principle 9, prevent identification of individuals. As an individual's mobile location is situated within more and more geospatial context data, its anonymity erodes. Measures should be put in place to prevent subsequent use of the data, resulting in identification of individuals or their location. And finally, principle 10, provide accountability. People who are represented in location data collected, combined, and used by organizations should be able to interrogate how it is collected and used in relation to them and their interests, and appeal those uses proportionate to levels of detail and potential for harms. So that's our 10 locus charter principles. Now you'll see on the screen here that we have created 7 groups, and those groups represent the different stakeholders within the use, reuse, collection of data. So for the mini workshop activity, we're going to split into teams representing different stakeholder groups to complete the activity. We're going to have a look at the groups. So if you could take a look at the groups and see which stakeholders you'll be representing, and you'll automatically be placed in those groups after we finish this explanation. So you don't have to do anything. Javan has already set it up, and you will automatically be placed in these groups once I've finished this explanation. So I have put a link. Let me see. Bear with me 1 second. I'll open the chat.
Catherine?
Yes?
I just wanted to point out that there might be a few people who have not been placed in any of the groups.
Okay.
And they are free. If anybody realizes that they haven't been placed in a group, they are free to join any of the groups.
Would you like to just explain how they can do that?
There's a link, when they open the groups, they have an option of joining. There's an option for joining the group.
So down at the bottom of your screen, then you will have an option there of joining the breakout sessions once they've opened.
Yes.
So you're welcome to join.
That is only for those that have not been assigned a group.
Okay, that's fantastic. Thank you for pointing that out. That will make it much easier when we have to set the groups up.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, so what other information do I need to let you know? So you'll be placed in the group, and if you're not placed in the group, then as Patrick said, you can choose which group you'd like to be part of. But everybody that had registered before the weekend has already been placed in groups. So I've put in the chat, you'll see a link to a Google spreadsheet, and we're going to use this as a worksheet really to complete the task, the workshop. So if you enter the Google spreadsheet and then scroll down to the table relating to your stakeholder group, then you can work together in that. So this is what you'll be using as a worksheet. And it might be easier within your groups to appoint a chairperson, and then that chairperson can then feed back to the group afterwards. So you'll see that there's a section for
Catherine,
you. Yeah.
the worksheet is not visible on the
The
screen.
worksheet's not visible. I've sent everybody a link. So if you open the link in the chat, there's a link.
Okay.
Click on that link and open it. Then it should take you to the Google document. Is it okay, Patrick? Can you access it now?
Okay, I can see the link in the chat.
Okay, so if everybody clicks on that link, it will take you to the Google document, and that's what we're going to use as a worksheet. So it will be easier if each of you, your groups, appoints a chairperson, and then you can feed back to the group afterwards. And what we'd like you to do is put yourself in the mindset of the stakeholder group that you're representing, so be that government, universities, end users, NGOs, and put yourself in the mindset. Okay, we'll just share quickly the document again. So put yourself in the mindset of that user group, and then on the left-hand side of the screen, you can order the different principles in the order of priority that stakeholder might give them, from the most to the least important, so 1 to 10. And then the space in the table on the right-hand side to make notes about why you found each principle more or less important. So you can either make those notes in the document, or the chairperson might like to make their own notes. So whatever works for you, as long as you can feed back to the group at the end. So you'll have 25 minutes in total to discuss the principles and to put them in order, 25 minutes. And now I think Javan will automatically put everyone in their groups, and you'll automatically come back in 25 minutes. So Javan, I'm leaving it with you. Patrick, do you know if Javan's opening the breakout rooms?
Yeah, I'm in touch with him, and I've asked him to go ahead and place people in groups. He's doing two things at the same time now, so I've just informed him.
No worries. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for your patience, everybody. It shouldn't take long.
Yeah, he's doing it now.
Okay.
Excellent. Okay, so what I would suggest is if you accidentally get placed in the wrong group, then just sort of carry on with the group that you are placed in. We did try and sort of spread people among the groups, but at the same time, just in the interest of time, it's not really going to make a difference which group that you are placed in. So if you just sort of carry on in the group that you are placed in, we can still feed back afterwards.
Yes, that's a good idea. And I have also put the link to the locust charter in the chat for everybody as well. So, if you want to look at it later, you have the link of it. So as soon as we have the groups ready, then you can start looking at the spreadsheet and start working on it.
Javan, I know that we tested this last week, but would it be easier for just people to join their own groups, do you think? My thoughts are it might be easier with the number of people that we have.
Yes, in fact, because as long as you are able to divide it, the group, the whole participants into 7 groups, that's okay, that's fine. That makes it easy for you. Jovan, are you there?
Sorry, they're having internet challenges at the headquarters, but they are working on it.
Oh, I see. Thanks.
Yeah.
So there is
Javan and Gorilla are working on it.
Okay, no worries, no worries. We'll wait. In the meanwhile,
Joseph, if you can speak to Javan, could you please ask him whether it would be easier for people just to join the breakout rooms? Could he open those and let participants join?
They are creating the rooms. So actually, because I'm a co-host and I'm seeing they're just recreating the rooms. So because of there was a power outage, then the internet went off.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's no worries. I'm just thinking about making it easier.
Hello.
Yes, Javan.
Hello. Yes, Javan. I'm Javan, yeah.
Yes.
Hi, Javan. So it's Kate.
Hi.
I know we tested this and it worked brilliantly last week, but I'm wondering, participants, would it be easier to open the rooms and ask participants to join them? Would that make it easier?
Yeah. Actually, what happened, I was following while I was on mute because I was in another meeting that required my attention.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. Thinking in terms of making things easier.
Unfortunately, the power flipped. There was a changeover, so the internet.
Joseph's just explained to us.
Yeah, then the rooms disappeared, so I couldn't open them. So I have to recreate. So just give me a minute. I'm starting them.
Would it be easier to open the rooms and for people to join, or?
Yeah, I'm just opening the rooms. I've created the rooms. I'm opening them now. Yeah. I've opened the rooms. Let me just close them first. I check the time. Okay. I've opened all the rooms. So I'll just request Joseph Mwenda to join governments, and then Geoffrey Rotich to go to universities, Florence Rungimbana join SMEs, and then Hope Katongole, kindly join big business. Then Sushit will go to research funder. And then Catherine, you'll go to NGOs.
Mhm.
And then end user will be Patrick Wahu and Victor Korir. Thank you, and sorry for the inconvenience.
No, please don't be. Thank you for your help.
Thank you. I'll automatically assign participants who will have not joined any group in the next 2 minutes. Kindly do that.
Okay, and like we have mentioned, if you accidentally end up in the wrong group, then don't worry, just carry on in the group that you've been assigned to, the group that you end up in, because hopefully the end result will be the same.
Sure.
There is one query in the chat asking, the spreadsheet failing to put numbers in order and comments. Kate,
That's fine. I will reply.
yes.
Although it'll be a direct reply, so you may not see that one.
No worries.
Ah, okay. I have seen what I have done. So everyone should have access now. I put everyone as a viewer rather than as an editor. Okay, I'm going to go and join the NGO group so that I can help if there are any questions, but please feel free to send me a direct message if you need help with anything. There should be one helper in each of your groups. Our ICAT colleagues and Sushith also is in a group, so just let us know.
Catherine, you're muted.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to now feedback. Thank you for that. We're going to now feedback on the rankings and what you decided to do in your different groups. And hopefully you found that quite complicated to do, because it is true that all of these points are important, but perhaps some are more important than others depending on your individual perspective or the perspective of the individual stakeholders. So who was the representative of Group 1, government?
Joseph was the secretary.
Representative of your group.
Yeah, I was a representative of the group.
Would you like to feedback on how you ranked them? Which did you find more important or least important from the perspective of government?
We ranked them, but I can't find the file anymore. I don't know where it disappeared to.
Should we share the spreadsheet, Kate? I think maybe, you know.
I've just shared the link to the spreadsheets again if you need to. Otherwise, just off the top of your head, which did you find the most important and least important in your group?
Oh, it's the first one. What we found, the number one was do no harm. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. So if you could give reasons for that as well, then that would be useful.
Yes, do no harm, which we said the reason is because this is the universal guideline. The government, whatever it does, it should ensure that there is no harm that is happening. The second one was understand the impact, and we said that understanding is key to making any decisions and policies. The third one is realizing opportunities, and this guides the research population and sample. The fourth one was address biases. This improves objectivity in the research procedure and findings. Then protect the vulnerable was number 5, which we said this is because it's tied to the do no harm principle to protect the vulnerable. Then number 6, we had the protect privacy, which is the privacy of citizens' information data is essential. Number 7, prevent identification of individuals, which is closely tied to protection of privacy. Number 8 is minimize intrusion, and we said this is also tied to the do no harm principle. And then number 10, we say that the government should always strive to provide accountability for people who are represented in location, data collected, etc., etc. Back to you, Catherine.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you for your feedback. And you know, I think we can all agree that yours is a very just and honest government, Joseph, your group. I'd like to live wherever you are.
Thank you.
So thank you for your feedback. So we'll move on to universities and see what perspective the universities group had on the same principles. So Jeffrey, who was feeding back from your group?
Okay, thank you so much, Catherine. I'm Juliet, and I'm representing Group 2, which was looking at universities and researchers. And this was our categorization. Number 1, we gave it provide accountability. Number 2, realize opportunities. 3, understand impact. 4, do no harm. 5, protect the vulnerable. 6, prevent identification of individuals. 7, minimize intrusion. 8, address bias. And 9, minimize data. And lastly, protect privacy. Protect privacy was our number 10. Over to you, Catherine, and thanks to Group 2 members.
Thank you very much, Juliet. That's a really good overview of kind of what a university might find important. And so kind of I can see that the doing no harm and the protection, sort of those ideas are up there again. So on to our third group, SMEs. What did you find to be the most important from the perspective of SMEs? Florence, Is it you or somebody else from your group that's feeding back? Number 3, SMEs.
Okay. For the SMEs, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
So I'll share my screen. And for the SMEs, we picked at number 1 as our first realizing opportunity, especially because we are a business and we are looking forward to development and growing our business to becoming not an SME, but a larger enterprise. And then we went down and picked on minimizing intrusion as our number 2 to reduce people who are attacking our business. And then number 3, we picked on preventing identification of individuals. And then number 4, we picked on protect privacy. And then number 5, we picked on provide accountability. After we've protected our privacy, now those people who are taking our data should be accountable for it. And then on number 6, we picked on addressing bias. If we realize that there's anybody who is not accountable with our data, we picked that one as number 6 based on that. And then we protected the vulnerable as well to go together with after addressing the bias. And then on the number 8 was the one that left, was which minimizing, number 8 was understanding impact. We understood the impact. And then number 9 now was the one minimizing data, because when you're an SME, you'll chunk on a lot of data. So minimizing it sometimes becomes a little bit challenging. And then the 10th one, do not harm. So in case we've not minimized some data, then those people who are accessing the data, they should not do harm with our data.
So just out of interest, why did you pick do no harm as the least important?
Okay, do no harm, like if it is the least, because when you're protected and you've covered all the other aspects, it means that most of the things are already taken care of. So only that part that is not taken care of, where you get access to our data that's not protected anywhere. So you should not do harm. Maybe in our policies we've not tackled some aspect that can be a leeway to you to get into our data. So I think that one becomes like an etc. like any other. So don't, in case you get access to a data that's not protected or something we've not actually expound on or realized that it's important to protect, or we've not updated our privacy policy on that, then I think you just don't do harm to it.
Okay, fantastic. So, we can see there's some very, very different priorities there.
Yes.
Thank you for feeding back. If you stop sharing your screen now really quickly, that would be great. Thank you very much. And thank you for feeding back. So on to group number 4, big business. So Hope, is it you or is it someone from your team feeding back? Group 4, big business.
Hello, thank you, Catherine. My name is Naftri Gademba. I'm representing Group 4. I hope my screen is visible from your side.
Yes, it is.
Okay,
Yes,
thank you very much. I am grateful that we are in agreement with the SME, because they aspire to be like us, big business, that realizing opportunities is number 1. For us, we are saying we are looking, when you're in business, looking for new emerging business is a priority. Then we went to number 2, that we want to understand the impact. So we prioritized the number 2, so that we need to understand the impact of our product or services to our consumers. Then we felt that number 3, protection of privacy. So to protect our consumers, because we are considering data that we either collect from our consumer and also the data they have for us. We put it at number 3. Number 4 is to prevent identification of individuals, because anonymity in data collection from our consumers is key. Number 5, we want to be accountable, so provide accountability. You need to be accountable to the community that we are serving. Then number 6, you say do no harm. As you serve your consumers, we need to protect them. Number 7 said minimize intrusion so that we observe confidentiality to our consumers and also them intruding into our business past what is reasonable. Number 8 is on minimize data. We don't want to waste resources correcting data and large data unnecessarily. We just want to correct the data that is reasonable for our use. And number 9, address bias. Okay, we are focusing on potential customers. So we might sometimes allow some bias because we are looking for future, clients. So we allowed some bias. That's why we gave it level 9. So level 10, we said this one of do no harm, though it's important. Protect the vulnerable, though it's important, but this might be more for NGOs than for big business. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Naftari. That's, again, a very, very different perspective on the same set of principles, but I think a fairly good overview of what a big business's priorities might be. If you can stop sharing your screen now, that would be great. Thank you very much. And thank you for feeding back to us. So thank you, Group 4. On to our research funders, Group 5. Sushith, I think that you were working with that group. Who's feeding back from Group 5?
Yeah, I was there, but it is other colleagues who are going to feed. So go ahead, whoever is in Group 5. I was moving around all different groups to get an idea. So whoever is from that group, please. Research funders.
Yes, thank you. In our group, under categorization, we had realized opportunities because you have to realize those opportunities before you can be able to arrange for funding provisions. Then number 2 was understanding the impacts. Because if you understand the impact, then you will have justification for that funding. Then next we went to protect. Just a minute, to protect the vulnerable. And from protecting the vulnerable, we went to number 4, which was prevent identification of individuals. Then from there, we next had minimize intrusion as number 6. Then we had number 7 as provide accountability. Then we had address biases as number 8. Then minimize data, number 9. And do no harm as number 10. Thank you.
Very quickly, Samuel, why did your group decide do no harm would be number 10?
When you are doing funding, if you put forward that aspect of doing no harm, then sometimes you may not really get the information that you require. So we put it as last because it then provides you an opportunity to get the information that you require, but then you also consider it later on. So it's important, but we put it number 10.
Yeah, absolutely. And that can be an answer as well, that it was just less important than the others because they are all very important points.
Yes.
So realising opportunities then was the most important in research funding. I think that would be fair to say. And thank you, Samuel and Group 5 for your feedback. So now we're on to Group 6, NGOs, and I believe it was Vincent from our group that was feeding back. Vincent. Vincent, would you like to feed back to the group from group 6, NGOs. Hi, Vincent, I think you might be muted. You might need to switch your microphone on.
Hello, are you getting me?
Yes, yes, we are. Thank you.
Okay. Are you seeing the slide as well?
Yes, we can see the slides.
Okay, thank you. This is group 6 dealing with NGO. Now, it is quite peculiar with this group in that we found some of the principles being similar to one another. So we had to give the same weight. Now, I begin with rating number 1 was given to understanding impact. Impact was given rating 1 because as NGOs, the main aspiration is to have impact on our beneficiaries. So we gave it number 1. Then number 2 went to realizing opportunities. Opportunities is also similar to the first one because we want to give opportunities to our beneficiaries. So it is quite important. That is why we gave it number 2. Of course, number 3 went to providing accountability. It was very clear to us that as NGOs, we are getting funding for our activities. We are also, it is also a responsibility. We have a role to play, but of course, we need to be accountable for whatever we do. We need to be accountable for the fundings involved. Number 4, we gave to minimizing intrusion and minimizing data. We saw this to be important because it builds trust. Then number 5, we gave it to do no harm. We also found it similar to protections of the vulnerable. So we gave it number 5. And also number 6, we gave it to protection of privacy and then preventions of identifications of individual because the two look similar. Definitely that one is also related to security, trust aspect. But of course we gave addressing bias the last rating of 7. Basically, it is less important compared to others when it comes to NGO activities. It is important, but compared to others, it is less important. So basically, this is what we did. I don't know whether there's a comment from any of the group members or whether I have time to give the floor to other group members. Over to you.
If anybody would like to say anything. Okay, I'll just sum up to say that we found that one actually quite difficult, giving the perspective of the NGO there, because the NGOs, they kind of occupy this quite unique space where essentially they're accountable to funders and to populations, but they also provide value to funders. So it's actually difficult to sort of really nail down what the priorities would be really in those circumstances.
Indeed.
Our group did find that quite interesting.
Sure.
Thank you very much, Vincent. Thank you for your feedback.
Okay, thank you.
Group number 7, end users. So I think the sheath again, you were sort of in that group to answer questions. So whoever was the chairperson for.
Agree is reporting for that group.
Sorry, Patrick?
Agree.
Okay.
Agree is reporting for that group.
If you'd like to take the floor then.
Agree, Adem.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll present on behalf of the group. And sorry, I'm not able to share my screen. So I'll just talk. So number one for me is do no harm. Ensure that everybody is safe. Number two is to protect the vulnerables, not expose them. Number three is to prevent identification. Always keep the IDs of the subjects anonymous. And number four is to protect privacy. There should be some level of confidentiality. And number five, understand the impact, the implications and the consequences. And number seven, minimize intrusion. Number eight is to minimize data being collected. And number nine, as per the group, is to provide for accountability. That is number eight, provide for accountability. Then number nine, realize the opportunities which come along with the collected data. And finally, once you have the data, you can now trace the bias. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. And so bias, I agree. I don't know if you could tell us why bias would be least important.
Come again?
Why did you place bias in last place?
Because I think now at this point, you have your data before you do things like cleaning. You try to trace maybe where you might have got some errors in the data, and maybe where they came from.
Okay, lovely. Thank you very much, and thank you for your feedback there. Thank you for feeding back to the group. So kind of as you see with the code of conduct, and this was sort of specifically around geospatial data, but as we've mentioned, there's codes of conduct really that cover almost every aspect of data science now, really, since we started working on the Agricultural Data Code of Conduct Toolkit. And, you know, as you've hopefully seen, it is a lot more complex than just giving one size fits all list of rules, which is why putting together policy and putting together laws is so very complex, because there's so many different actors within data ecosystems that have different prerogatives, which is what I hope we've managed to show here. So I'll just share my screen very quickly because I have one final slide, and I'm really sorry that this did run over a little bit, but hopefully it was worthwhile staying around to take part in that activity and stay till the end. So I'm not sure, can you see the slide that I'm sharing?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm not going to maximize it because then I might have to go back to the beginning. So we'll just keep it small like this. But just to let you know that there are actually lots of ways that you can use codes of conduct. So for example, with the Locus Charter, you can use this yourselves to help structure questions around practice and impacts when using data. And you can use the charter as a basis for roundtables, trainings, or organizational development, or, you know, the sort of stuff that we're doing here. But also kind of bearing in mind that the workshop that we simulated here, it's very similar to the way that these tools are created in the first place, in order to get everybody's input and to understand everybody's perspective. You can join the community and international conversation. So ethicalgeo.org/Locus Charter. And if you kind of look on their website there, the Ethical Geo website, under Locus Charter, then you can find lots of ways that you can get involved in that. And hashtag Locus Charter on social media. You can join in the debate there, and you can share any related initiatives that you might be working on in the ethical use of location data. And I'm sure for the other codes of conduct, if you look those up, then there are ways of getting involved in those as well. Sushith, I'm not sure if you have anything to add, but I'm on to the goodbye and thank you very much.
Thank you. I think we covered everything, and thank you for all these participants in all the groups, I would say, because I think that's very important. You were able to discuss ideas, and in fact, I just saw one comment from Florence, asking, is there a tie? Because in fact, as Kate has already told, the whole idea is to make you think, think critically on different perspectives, and there is no one answer for any of these groups or discussions. But the whole, you yourself now realize how it's up to you, depending on the project, depending on the to decide and guide what you think might be the most important. But hopefully this whole exercise help you understand the wider guidelines and wider principles that you need to be aware of whenever you are doing the research project. And when we look back at what we have gone through, in the beginning itself, we looked into why responsible research and innovation is important, why even look at the area of framework, how you start looking at, rather than you start looking into how do you anticipate, how do you reflect on it, all these kind of discussions in this short breakout kind of practical exercise. Hopefully you had a feel of how this can be done, and this will help when you start supervising your PhD students, whichever research team they are working in, when they are working in data science as part of the research, you should be able to get more ideas on how to guide them as well. So we are very, very grateful to ICAD and all of you for joining us today, and it was a very amazing, great. It is great to see really active participation from all of you. We are aware that we had to slightly overrun the time, but really pleased that we were able to cover as much as we can within this time frame. As we mentioned in the beginning, it is actually a two-day kind of data ethics event that we tried to fit in with this within like a 2.5 hour session. But we were very happy to see we could at least give the main points covered within that time frame. So very happy, very grateful to ICAD for organizing this this training session, and more importantly including data ethics as part of this graduate supervisor training the session as well, which I think is very important. And I really hope you continue to keep engaged in these data ethics discussions. And we will be running a lot of webinars, a lot of other activities jointly later as well. So we hope to be in touch with all of you in one form or another, so we can keep working in different areas. So I just want to say a big thank you to Patrick, and also thanks to Javan and all the colleagues who are working behind the scenes to make this all happen. All these breakout rooms were all happening because of the help and support of all the colleagues in ICAD. So my big thank you on behalf of both of us to everyone. So Kate, anything else you want to add?
No, I think that you've given a very, very good overview. So yeah, I'll extend my thanks and add my thanks to that. Cool.
Thank you. Patrick, anything you want to tell, any other
Okay. Yeah. On behalf of ICAD, I just wanted to let the participants know that the ethical data initiative, has been a very key partner, in organizing this training course, and that you've really played a very big role, in helping us to get, things moving. And, they should also be aware that you've delivered your session from the UK, which is something quite remarkable. So it's our hope that the material, that you have delivered, during the course of this training will be useful to them, and that it is something that they'll be able to apply in the work that they are doing. So thank you very much. I've been clapping on behalf of the group.
Thank you.
We're used to doing that, face to face. We haven't quite figured out how to do it through Zoom. So that clap is on behalf of everybody. And we hope that, as we continue to organize other activities,
Yeah.
you know, we will go along with you and you'll be part of what we'll be doing in the future. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
As you say, Patrick,
now, oh, you wanted to say something?
the wonders of modern technology. I think
Yes, exactly.
that we are able to join you today. So thank you to
Yeah.
Javan and your technical team for making this all possible for us today.
Thank you,
Thank you
too.
so
Thank you
much.
very much.
So group, we resume tomorrow at 9 o'clock, eh?
East African time.
Yeah, in terms of timing, normal service resumes. Okay, 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, East African time.
All right. Thank you.
See you,
All right.
and thank you for your participation today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye. Bye.
I'm officially ending the meeting for the session for today.
Thank you, Javan.
See you again tomorrow.
Thank you, Javan. Yeah, you may end the meeting now. All the best.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much.